there's a truth you've probably never heard in any classroom. You, the one living, breathing, and watching this video, are a direct descendant of humanity's last survivors. Not metaphorically, but in the literal, biological sense of evolutionary history. Because once, at a real moment in time, the entire species Homo sapiens stood on the edge of extinction. Not in myth, not in some Hollywood apocalypse, but in reality, a reality written into the DNA inside your body. When geneticists analyzed the genome of modern humans, they found something strange. Compared to other primates, like chimpanzees, gorillas, or even domestic dogs, humans have shockingly low genetic diversity. In simple terms, we are far more alike than we appear on the outside, and that only happens when, at some point in the past, nearly all of us were wiped out. And indeed, there was such a time, about 70 to 80,000 years ago. Genetic models suggest that the human population may have shrunk to just a few thousand individuals, maybe even a few hundred. Not millions, not hundreds of thousands, just a few hundred fragile lives scattered across a wild, dangerous world. If a predator had found their hiding place, if a storm or drought had struck one last time, then we, today, would never have existed. No iPhones, no cities, no artificial intelligence, no YouTube videos, just another broken branch in the evolutionary tree, snapped off forever. But something miraculous happened. They survived. They reproduced. They left traces of their struggle in bones, in caves, in flint tools, and in you. You are a living link in a bloodline that once stared extinction in the face. And this is the story of that terrifying bottleneck. Part 2, Population Bottleneck, the slow-motion extinction. We often think of extinction as an explosion. A meteor strikes, fire rains down, everything vanishes in an instant. But there's another kind of extinction, quiet, cold, and slow, and far more terrifying. It's called a population bottleneck. This happens when a species, for any number of reasons, collapses in numbers over a short period of time. A volcanic eruption, a deadly pandemic, a prolonged winter, a massacre, or simply a shortage of food. The collapse doesn't need to wipe out every individual. It just needs to leave too few. For example, if a population of 100,000 suddenly drops to just 100, then 99.9% of its genetic diversity is gone forever. That means all future generations inherit genes from only a handful of survivors. Beneficial mutations are lost. Hidden genetic diseases become widespread. The entire population becomes dangerously similar, vulnerable to a single virus or even a minor climate shift. A bottleneck doesn't kill outright, but it breaks the species' ability to adapt. And then, within a few generations, the species vanishes. No bombs, no meteors, just a slow unraveling of life. What makes this mechanism so chilling is that it's happening right now, all around us. Look at the cheetah, the fastest land predator on Earth. On the outside, they look powerful, but on the inside, their genes are nearly identical. Scientists once transplanted skin tissue from one cheetah to another with no rejection drugs because their immune systems couldn't tell the difference between foreign and familiar anymore. Why? Because tens of thousands of years ago, the cheetah went through a catastrophic bottleneck. It survived, but only as a genetic ghost of what it once was, and it's not alone. The California condor once dwindled to fewer than 30 birds. The kakapo parrot of New Zealand, thought to be extinct, had just a few dozen individuals left. The European bison, Mongolian wild horse, Arabian oryx, each of them carries a genetic scar, a blood-stained lesson in biological fragility. The consequences? Genetic disorders, low fertility, high disease susceptibility, skyrocketing infant mortality. And without artificial intervention, they would be gone. But the greatest population bottleneck of all time didn't happen in the Amazon rainforest or on the African savanna. It happened within our own species. A catastrophe so massive, its aftermath is still imprinted in our blood, our cells, our DNA. A genetic reset, a moment when humanity nearly vanished from Earth. And that story begins with a blast in Sumatra. Part 3, the Toba disaster, the blast that shattered humanity 74,000 years ago. A sound ripped through the skies of Southeast Asia. Not from a meteor, not from mankind, but from the fiery heart of the Earth, Toba. In what is now Sumatra, Indonesia, a supervolcano erupted with a force 2,800 times greater than Mount St. Helens, more powerful than any weapon humanity has ever created. Within mere hours, trillions of tons of ash were blasted into the atmosphere. The sunlight disappeared, and the entire Southeast Asian region was plunged into eternal darkness. A winter began, but not just any winter. The ash blocked the ozone layer. Sunlight could no longer reach the ground. Global temperatures plummeted, falling by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius and up to 15 degrees Celsius in some regions. What followed was a volcanic winter that lasted at least 6 years, and an extended cold period that may have continued for nearly 1,000 years. The result? Plants could no longer photosynthesize. Food vanished. Entire ecosystems collapsed. Animals starved to death. And humans, fragile and few, were swept into a spiral of extinction. But how do we know this really happened? In the 1990s, anthropologist Stanley Ambrose from the University of Illinois proposed a shocking hypothesis. The Toba eruption wasn't just a volcanic event. It was the trigger of a global genetic bottleneck in early humans. When scientists analyzed mitochondrial DNA from modern humans across the continents, they discovered something astonishing. The genetic diversity of Homo sapiens is abnormally low. Despite living thousands of miles apart, Ethiopians, Italians, Japanese, Turks all share an unusually similar genetic signature. This isn't normal. In a species that's existed for hundreds of thousands of years across the globe, we should have thousands of unique genetic lineages. But we don't. All evidence points to this. Our most recent common maternal ancestor, mitochondrial Eve, lived only about 150,000 years ago. And since then, the human gene pool has passed through a narrow funnel, a genetic bottleneck, a moment when we almost vanished. And that moment eerily aligns with the eruption of Toba. Ambrose theorized that the blast wiped out most of early humanity, leaving behind just a few thousand, maybe even a few hundred individuals clinging to life along Africa's coasts. They hid in caves, ate shellfish, seaweed, anything that survived beneath the ash. They weren't stronger, they weren't smarter, they were just luckier. And from those lucky survivors, all 8 billion people alive today were born. If you've ever wondered, why are modern humans so genetically alike? Why do we all carry the same handful of genetic mutations? Why do most non-African men trace back to a single Y chromosome atom? Why can a virus travel across the planet in a matter of weeks? The answer may lie in Toba's ash. Part 4, The Last Cave. Life after the apocalypse. Imagine walking into a rough, wind-beaten cave perched on a cliffside along the southern coast of Africa. Outside, the wind howls like a mourning spirit. Inside, a flickering fire casts trembling shadows across damp stone walls, kissed by the salty breath of the sea. There are no cities, no fertile plains, no herds of large animals to hunt, only the ocean, seashells, seaweed, and a small group of people, survivors of the end of the world. That place is called Pinnacle Point 13B, or simply PP13B, a cave overlooking Mossel Bay, South Africa, believed by archaeologists to be one of the last strongholds of Homo sapiens after the Toba Catastrophe. They had almost nothing. No wheat, no livestock, no metal for tools or weapons. But they had 3 things more powerful than any weapon: fire, the ocean, and memory. When archaeologists began excavating PP13B in the early 21st century, they didn't just find shells and bones. They found evidence of a living culture. Layer upon layer of sediment, built up over thousands of years, revealed. Layers of ash, carefully gathered. Signs of controlled, habitual fire use, not accidental wildfires. Stones coated with red ochre pigment, one of the earliest examples of using symbols to convey meaning. Shellfish and fish gathered seasonally. Proof they understood tidal rhythms and marine ecosystems. This place was not just a shelter. It was a school, a library of collective memory, a place where humanity began again after near extinction. In a world where the skies were black with ash, the only remaining light came from the fires within PP13B, and in that firelight, stories were passed down, through hands, through stone, through the glimmer in someone's eye. Children born there would never know what had come before. They only knew the sea brought food. The fire brought life, and humans survived only when they stayed together. PP13B was no metropolis. Perhaps only a few dozen individuals lived scattered along the bay, but they carried everything that was left of the human species. Genes. Part 5, the cost of survival. Surviving a catastrophe is not the same as winning. Sometimes, continuing to exist is merely the beginning of an unending chain of trauma. After the Toba bottleneck, Homo sapiens emerged from hell, but they were no longer the same. The genome of the entire species had been reset. Instead of millions of rich genetic lineages, only a few survived, and we are the descendants of those last remaining threads. And the cost? It lies deep within every cell of our bodies. Silent genetic disorders. Many of the hereditary diseases that humanity faces today, from Parkinson's to albinism, can be traced back to periods of genetic impoverishment after the bottleneck. Mutations that were once rare or harmless became widespread simply because there was no one left to weed them out. Forced inbreeding. When the population dropped to just a few hundred individuals, reproduction among closely related people was inevitable. This led to long-lasting consequences. Higher rates of birth defects, weaker immune systems, a resurgence of genetic disorders. Life went on, but it carried with it a legacy of damaged code. Immune system vulnerability. A genetically uniform population is dangerously exposed to disease. If a single virus hits the right Achilles heel in our shared immunity, the result could be a second extinction, not of fire or ash, but of microscopic death. We thought we had escaped death, but in truth, we carried it with us, inside our blood, inside our bones, a ghost in our genome. And now, in the 21st century, when humanity is at its peak in power, in numbers, but also in fragility, we are still paying the price for that ancient brush with extinction. We survived, but in exchange, we carry scars in our DNA that may never heal. Part 6, a warning for the future. A genetic bottleneck is not just a closed chapter. It isn't merely something that happened 74,000 years ago. It can happen again, at any moment. Last time, it was a supervolcano. Next time, it might be our own doing. Look back at the past 2 years. A single virus, just a fragile strand of RNA, claimed millions of lives. COVID-19 was a bitter reminder that we are not invincible. Had it mutated further, become stronger, smarter, or simply struck the soft underbelly of our collective immune system, we could have faced another genetic bottleneck. And what about war? One finger, one red button. That's all it takes. Just 50 nuclear warheads are enough to trigger an artificial winter, a man-made Toba. Nuclear ash blankets the sky, sunlight disappears, crops die, no food, no power, no civilization. Would humanity be able to huddle into caves once again? And then, there's climate change. We're burning our planet faster than Toba ever did. Melting ice in the Arctic, fires in the Amazon, deadly heat waves across Europe. All echo a cycle from long ago, a cycle our ancestors barely survived through sheer luck. But luck doesn't always come twice. Last time, a few hundred people lived and rewrote the story of humanity. Next time, there may be no one left to write at all. No more PP-13B, no more shellfish to gather, no more memory to pass down. Will you or your descendants be among the survivors next time? Will humanity be humble enough to learn from the past, or will we drive ourselves into one final bottleneck? The answer lies in how we live today.